So the story features solely the voice of the narrator, which primarily focuses on her memories and on her emotions. So the opening of the story places the relationship between intimacy and liminality at the core of the narrator's affair, as she locates the intimate encounters in these motor rooms, which I interpret as transitional spaces. So when examining intimacy and the spaces it occupies, Lauren Berlant has argued that, and I quote, "The inwardness of the intimate is met by a corresponding publicness. People consent to trust their desire for life to institutions of intimacy, and it is hoped that the relationship formed with those frames will turn up beautifully lasting over the duration of a decade, perhaps across generations." So Berlant's observation that intimacy is expected to be controlled and contained by institutions, in the case of the short story protagonist, marriage was expected to be the institution which ensured durable intimacy. So Berlant also knows that while intimacy has been associated with the private domain, intimate relationships tend to occupy both, as I mentioned, the private and the public spheres, well, especially normative ones. So, however, what's left behind focuses on an affair, a form of intimacy which just does not fit dominant conversations of intimacy. Berlant presents moment of disturbance as intrinsic to the examination of intimacy, which shows the affinity that the notion of liminality has with the genre of the short story. So her identification of intimacy as unstable and unexpected provides illuminated insight into what's left behind, where the narrator actually attempts to control intimacy through spatial separations. So the narrator in What's Left Behind presents her affair as something isolated in time and space from her everyday life. She describes their routine and the intimate relationship as even manageable. So to control the affair, the narrator creates a recurrent movement between inside and outside the motor rooms, as she presents both of these rooms and their doors are liminal spaces and the only spaces where their relationship and their sexual encounters become possible. So the door of each room comes to symbolize a threshold space, which separates the private relationship from the public personas, as the intimacy these characters share can only be possible inside the walls of the motor room. So Kate takes liminality as a point of departure to examine intimacy through this story and to interrogate how the narrator wishes to control her attachment by containing them in a cherished liminal space. Nevertheless, even the narrator physically leaves the room, she does not mentally do so, as she claims, that's a quote from the PowerPoint, "Every room we left in that time would stay in my head afterwards." So when she's back into her real life, that means when she's back with her husband at home, she continues to imagine in such liminal spaces even after and during their having sexual intercourse. So the narrator takes refuge in her mind to shift through her memories. As Berlant argues, memory works to create portable scenes that remind one of past intimacies. So this statement resonates with how the narrator uses her imagination and her memory to escape reality. And I'm only going to read the beginning, but for you to get the sense that she's having an imaginary conversation. I have her say, "Remember how you always wanted to drive to the ocean?" I have her say, "You always wanted to get into my car and drive away." So she's rejecting her memories, and this is a moment of revelation in the sense that she's aware of her lover's absence, but she's fighting and she's dealing with complex emotions. So the narrator tries to mask her vulnerability by rejecting these memories, which have structured the whole short story. And she concludes the dialogue and the short story by saying, "I don't remember nothing. I don't have all that many memories." And I'm going to briefly go back to the previous slide that suggests that what she remembers is significant and she remembers it all. She's just trying to mask her vulnerability. So the melancholic ending of the story reveals that she is finally conscious of the impossibility of her wish to suspend normativity, to live liminally, and to control the intimacy, and that it has been at least attempted to be contained in transitional spaces. So Ultimately, reading intimacy and liminality through these short story challenges the location of intimacy as just a pause in between normative conditions, as the story highlights the consequences that this melancholical entrapment has on the narrator, as it also reveals the shortcomings of a heteronormative marriage. So Kay's representation of liminality through these short stories ensures the term acquires new currency in a departure from a purely anthropological understanding. Through these short stories, liminality is presented as a creative space, which enables Kay to destabilize conventional notions of intimacy, to interrogate social constructions which shape understandings of intimacy as well. So the possibilities offered by these transitional spaces enable Kay to undertake some rethinking of intimacy and to place the disturbance of understandings of intimacy at the center of her interrogation. So, as Milan has argued, and I quote, as with minor literatures, minor intimacies, that's say the ones that do not take a central stage in society, and I go back to the quote, have been forced to develop aesthetics of the extreme to push these spaces into being by small and grand gestures. So what's left behind is a short story with a grand gesture, as it brings a queer relationship to the center of a conversation about intimacy. Kay's stories humanize the experience of intimacy and highlights Berland's observation, and I quote, that virtually no one knows how to do intimacy. So Kay develops an aesthetic of attachment through the short story genre that has been identified as minor literature, to depict and to give visibility to minor intimacies, that's to say to an affair, and also by creating the intimate space. But I argue that Kay goes beyond just giving visibility and representations to these attachments. So through her reading of intimacy, Kay is deeply sympathetic towards a narrator who is dealing with complex emotions. So the story places readers inside these rooms to accompany the narrator when navigating through the interrogating the borders of the intimate domain. And that would be all. Thank you.